In October of 2020, one of the largest yoga chains in the United States announced something almost nobody in the fitness industry saw coming. Every single one of its studios, more than 60 locations across the country, would close permanently all at once, not slowly, not one underperforming location at a time, all of them gone in a single announcement. And here's the part that should genuinely confuse you. This wasn't a company nobody wanted. Yoga in America was more popular in 2020 than it had ever been in history. This company had been acquired by a private equity firm for $45 million, gone public 2 years later, and raised another $40 million from investors who believed in exactly this business. It had the brand, the demand, the capital, and the customers. And it still collapsed overnight, owing somewhere between $50 and $100 million to creditors it could no longer pay. If you're thinking about opening a yoga or Pilates studio, that story is not a footnote. It is the entire lesson. Because underneath the candles and the essential oils and the peaceful instructor voice, a boutique fitness studio runs on one of the most unforgiving little math problems in all of small business. A math problem that doesn't care how much your members love you. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what it is. Exactly why it eventually caught up with a company that had every advantage money could buy, and exactly what you'd need to do differently to actually make one of these work. Let's start with what it costs to get in the door, because this is where yoga and Pilates studios genuinely diverge from almost everything else in this series. A no-frills yoga studio, just mats, a sound system, and a lease, can open for well under $50,000 in a smaller market. That's an astonishingly low barrier to entry compared to a gym or a restaurant. But add Pilates reformer equipment into the mix, the specialized machines that make Pilates, and the number changes fast. A lean, single-room Pilates studio typically runs somewhere between $100,000 and $350,000 once you count build-out, the reformers themselves, software, and several months of working capital to survive before the membership base built. Go the franchise route with an established boutique brand, and you're looking at $300,000 to $800,000 upfront, including a franchise fee that alone can run $60,000 or more, plus royalties of around 8% and a marketing fee of another 2% on everything you earn forever. So where does the money actually come from? A healthy, well-run studio needs somewhere around 100 to 150 active paying members, generating something like $100 to $200 a month each, and it needs to keep its classes running at 75 to 85% capacity to hit that number consistently. Industry-wide, the average profit margin across yoga and Pilates studios sits at a surprisingly thin 6 to 7% of revenue. Though well-managed studios that control their biggest costs can push that up into the 15 to 25% range. The typical owner takes home somewhere between $10,000 and $150,000 a year, a genuinely wide range that depends almost entirely on three things: your rent, your instructor pay, and how much of your revenue comes from recurring memberships instead of one-off drop-ins. Here's the number that actually decides whether this business works, and it's your room. Unlike a gym, where you can cram more equipment into a corner and squeeze out more members, a boutique studio has a hard physical ceiling. A Pilates studio might fit 8 to 12 reformers in a room. A yoga studio might fit 20 to 30 mats. That's it. That's the entire revenue potential of that room, for that hour, no matter how good your instructor is or how loyal your members are. You cannot oversell a boutique fitness class the way an airline oversells seats, because if you sell 40 spots for a 20-mat room, 40 people show up and 20 of them stand in the parking lot. This means your entire revenue ceiling is fixed the day you sign your lease and choose your room size, and the only way to grow past that ceiling is to add more class times, hire more instructors, or open a second location, each of which comes with its own new fixed costs, and that ceiling collides directly with your two biggest expenses. Rent should ideally stay under 15 to 20% of your gross revenue, because a studio with a beautiful, sky-high rent location can look fully booked every single day and still barely break even, since the landlord is quietly taking a bigger bite out of every class than your business plan accounted for. An instructor payroll typically runs 35 to 45% of revenue, Because unlike a gym where members mostly supervise themselves on machines, every single class in a Boutique studio requires a paid, trained instructor standing in the room the entire time, whether that class has 4 people in it or 24. A half-empty class costs you almost exactly the same in instructor pay as a completely full one. This is the quiet trap that catches so many first-time studio owners. The math looks great on a spreadsheet built around full classes, and then real life delivers a lot of half-full ones, and the instructor still needs to be paid for the full hour either way. Now let's go back to that company from the opening, because every single piece of what happened to them traces directly back to this exact math. That business had been built by a private equity firm that acquired it for $45 million in 2014, took it public in 2017 to raise another $40 million, and then tried to scale it the way you'd scale a tech company: more locations, more cities, more growth, fueled by outside capital, instead of by each individual studio actually proving it could hit that 75 to 85% capacity number on its own. The company's own bankruptcy filing showed that in 2019, its in-person studios generated around $58.5 million in revenue, the vast majority of the entire business. But scaling a chain of rooms with a hard capacity ceiling means signing more and more leases, and more leases means more fixed rent obligations stacking on top of each other. Obligations that don't care whether each new location individually reaches full class occupancy on its own timeline. When the pandemic hit in March of 2020 and every single studio was forced to close its doors, the membership revenue that was supposed to cover all of those leases simply vanished overnight, while the rent, the underlying debt from years of expansion, and the corporate overhead built for a much bigger operation kept accruing every single day. By October, the company filed for Chapter 11, and rather than trying to reopen and slowly rebuild occupancy studio by studio, it made the call that so many overextended boutique fitness chains eventually make. It closed every single physical location for good and tried to survive purely as a digital streaming brand instead, because keeping the real estate alive simply wasn't mathematically possible anymore. The lesson isn't that people stopped wanting yoga. The lesson is that this business model has a very specific, very narrow tolerance for error. A single studio in one good location, run by an owner who keeps rent and instructor costs disciplined and builds real membership loyalty over a couple of years, can absolutely work, and plenty of independent studio owners quietly make a comfortable living doing exactly that. But the moment you try to scale that formula, the way you'd scale a restaurant chain or a gas station chain, stacking lease after lease onto a business where every single room has a hard, physical capacity limit, you're betting that every new location will independently climb to that 75% occupancy mark on its own before the accumulated rent obligations catch up with you. Bet wrong, or get hit by something completely outside your control, and there's very little room in that 6 to 7% industry average margin to absorb the shock. So let's close the loop. You can open a basic yoga studio for well under $50,000, or a proper Pilates studio for somewhere between $100,000 and $800,000 if you go the franchise route. Run it well, and you might take home somewhere between $10,000 and $150,000 a year, with your rent and your instructor's payroll together eating more than half of everything you bring in before you see $1 of profit. And unlike almost every other business in this series, you cannot simply pack more people into the room to fix a bad month, because the room only holds what it holds. So the next time you walk past a beautifully lit yoga studio with a full class and a waitlist, understand what you're actually looking at. You're not looking at an easy passion business built on candles and community. You're looking at a business with a hard ceiling on how much money it can ever make in that room, in that hour, competing against a landlord and a payroll that both expect to be paid in full, whether that ceiling gets hit or not.